Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. We spent a lot of time leading up to it talking about Poe, learning a little bit about what made him tick, a little bit about his tragedy in his life, and most of it dealing with his relationships with his women, starting with his mother, who died of tuberculosis, which is the coughing, and up comes some blood, and you just keep, over a period of years, just keep deteriorating and eventually die. He was paranoid about this. Remember, he fell in love with his cousin. It was Virginia. She was really young, first cousin, so it seems kind of weird by today's standards. Probably then too. And she was singing once, and a little spot of blood appeared on her lips, and he started to freak out. And over the next 5 years, she was better, she was worse, she was better, and eventually she died, which is kind of like a death sentence. You know that it's coming, and this might be the last Christmas or the last month you're with them, whatever, however you rationalize dealing with the loss. And so he had to deal with this a bunch. And then we saw, his life spiral out of control, mystery surrounding his death, drinking a lot, showing up. People found him in other people's clothes after being, gone for several days, and just a really tormented soul. And through a lot of his literature, you were able to see some of the inner workings of his mind, what kind of makes him tick. And as we saw, he was kind of the father of the detective story. There's a crime, and then how do we solve it, and how we find the criminal, that type of thing. Looking at the beginning of this story, Masque of the Red Death, we talked about plague, the Black Death going throughout Europe in the 1300s. Plague killed 25 million people during that century, so a lot of people. This story really focuses on what they call the Red Death, which kind of takes the tuberculosis of his life and associates the red blood with that, but then kind of combines that with the Black Death, so that it was a fatal plague that someone got, and as we saw on the first page, you die within a half hour, from the seizures to stop breathing, dead. And so tuberculosis didn't work that quickly, but yet he took the Red Death and the blood and the look of that from the tuberculosis and kind of combined that here for the most gruesome plague that he could think of, that he would have to deal with. This is a story, as it said in the building background. This is an allegory where all of the characters, all of the settings, they usually stand for something else besides just an entertaining story. Okay, you'll hear that term a lot, allegory. There's usually a moral to the story. So always be able to figure out what that is. I think by the end of this one, we will be able to ascertain what that moral was. But just understand that when you see that's what characters usually stand for, something, the setting. But overall, there should be a moral and a purpose to the story, and it's not just to entertain; it's to teach you something. So on page 84, the very first page of the Masque of the Red Death, it gave the physical description as to what the death looked like, how people could tell that you had it, and ultimately the biggest telling feature was the presence of blood on your face and on your bodies, and oozing, as we set up earlier, kind of like a Play-Doh fun factory, just oozing out of your pores, and you were splotchy and had blood around it, and people did not come around you. At the bottom of that first paragraph, they're having it upon the face, where the pest band which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow man. So the moment that you had all of this stuff on your face, you were shunned, you were done. Okay, it was over. And that's where it says the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. Prince Prospero, kind of the main character, not that we ever really care about him as we would with other lead characters. He has this big castle-type abbey place that's within walls, and he kind of invites everybody that's friendly to him, 1,000 of his friends and knights and dames, and he brings them in, and the moment they get inside the doors, they lock the doors and weld them shut and bolt the doors, so that once we are in and you don't have any red death markings on you, you don't have any, okay, you're good, you're clean, shut the door, we're protected, we're safe. Because no one can get in or out. And we bolted it and welded it shut from the inside so that if anybody freaks out, they can't run away and they can't contaminate. Because it only takes one person to get in, and you could imagine it spreading. You know, this you see this a lot in, you know, zombie movies, when people finally find that one place where they can hole up and be safe. You know, it only takes one person to be bit, you know, and let that fester, and then they become a zombie, and then it can spread. That's plague. Okay, that's plague, and that's something that they are trying to keep out. They're cheating death. They think that they can stay holed up here and have parties and drink and play music, and they will escape death. And for some part, they delay death. But as we'll see towards the end, you can never stop it. Okay, you can't stop it completely. You might be able to evade it for a little bit, but you can't stop it. To prolong it for about 5 or 6 months. If you look on the second page, they were able to have this party, and it goes on for 5 or 6 months. Everything's great. You know, they're having different kinds of balls and dances and parties and food and just having a great time. They describe the setting. If you follow along with me there at the bottom of 85. In palaces, in each room, they like to keep things nice and long, so you open up sliding doors and you can see far, far, you know, away, and look at how big everything is. This particular layout was really unique. Okay, it was, you know, every 20 or was it 20, 30 feet or yards, there was a sharp turn. And so if you were within one room, you couldn't look 5 rooms away or 1 room away. You can't look around a corner. And so it's almost like, I'm envisioning in my mind kind of like an octagon, like a stop sign. And if you're on one side of the stop sign, you can't see more than maybe one, if you look around the corner, of one other room. And each of these rooms is unique because it has its own color, its own hue. There's the blue room, there's the orange room, there's the white room, where everything in that room, including the glass that's stained glass painted, is all that one color. And so it's bizarre, which that Prince Prospero is a bizarre individual. Kind of strange. Some people think that he could be mad. You know, he's just out there. So yeah, there was purple, green, orange, white, violet, but the 7th one, and this is in the right-hand column if you can follow with me. The 7th apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. So all black velvety. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes were scarlet, a deep blood color. A deep blood color. So everything's black except for this blood color stained window. So any light that were to come out of that window would have the aura, the color of blood. So imagine what that would look like being cast upon, you know, everything. So that's a very unique one. No rooms had its own natural light. I mean, like a light or candelabra or chandelier. There was just a tripod of a fire that would go through the glass and light and cast that color along everywhere. But there was no, let's go outside and see what the sun looks like. You know, they were stuck because while they were partying, having a good time, they talked about the pestilence, the plague was going on just outside the walls and throughout the country, where, you know, millions of people were dying, but they were safe and were prolonging their life. Another thing that was really interesting was in that black room was the presence of a clock. And I think you've all seen one of these in movies, or if you don't have one, or grandparents, a big grandfather clock. It's a big ebony black clock in the black velvet room. And what's scary about this is every hour when it rings, everybody shuts up. No matter if it's 1, 2 rings, or 12 rings, everybody stops doing what they're doing because there's just something really spooky and ghastly and wrong when that thing goes off. And that happens every hour. While the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest people, so the happiest, grew pale, so lost color in their face. And the more aged and sedate, so the most relaxed, passed their hands over the brows as if confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. So once it completely stopped, oh, next time it does that, I'm not going to act that way again. You know, they had this little chuckle, this little laugh. Who's scared? Let's just, okay, music? Okay, we'll get the music going again. But the next hour came, and it was the exact same thing. Now imagine that going on all the time. And just think, they've been here 5 or 6 months, and every hour they get spooked by this thing. Spooked, that's not a very wonderful place to be enshrined, I guess you could say. It was noted on the right-hand column of 86, just Prince Prospero, how out there he was with regard to the festivities and the types of people, you know, that they were, you know, the actors or the jugglers, or they were at masquerade parties where your face is covered, you know, it's like a costume party, like Halloween. And he's just so out there. And they need to tell you this, that he's so out there and so bizarre, so that when we see the presence of the masked man on the next page, the prince doesn't like that. That's too out there. That's just obscene. That is bad taste. And for the prince to say that that is bad taste, that's pretty significant. Okay, and that's why we have to establish the prince and what his feelings are early on. Follow along on 88. The clock just struck midnight. And before the last of the dong, dong, you know, every ding dong that they had, before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. Meaning, before that clock finished, people started noticing that there's somebody over here. And I've never seen that man before. They've been locked in this place for 5 or 6 months, partying with the same people. You don't just spot somebody that I've never spotted before. Because how did he get there? They locked and welded the doors. It's not like, oh, I'm late to the party. Excuse me, did I miss anything? It's strictly, somebody's here that wasn't here a minute ago. So that's kind of a spook. But what's really spooky about this person is his costume. They said that in truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited. So you could do and dress up as anything you want. But this intruder, he was out of bounds. Because the reason that they're hiding here is because they're trying to evade the Red Death. Well, what did he come dressed as? He came dressed as somebody who died from the Red Death. The figure was tall and gaunt and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. So it looked like he was buried in these clothes. And they were covered in blood all over. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting cheek. So you look so closely and it was a corpse face, decomposing corpse face, covered in blood. It looks so real. If anybody got close enough, you wouldn't be able to tell that that's not real. And we see what happens in the next couple pages, so we know that it is a real person and it's not somebody just dressed up for the party. But this is like going to, you know, some sort of, and having the worst bad taste, you know, going to some AIDS fundraiser and you showing up looking like a terminal AIDS patient on death's door. There's no humor in that. There's none. And here we have pretty much the exact same thing. And the prince thought it was just over the top. And they said that he had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture, his clothes, was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow with all the features of the face was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. So with that blood. The last page, the prince became pretty upset when he saw it. Okay? Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlement. So if we are going to kill him for such bad taste, unmask him. I want to see who this person is that's mocking everything. It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the prince, Prospero, as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed, so it was quiet. But remember, these rooms weren't just one long shot, and the blue room was way at the end, and the black room was down there. But he's heard about this. You wouldn't believe what we just... And so, who dares? And you can imagine the volume and the noise bringing it. And so the prince gets so upset that he, goes after the death. Where are we at? At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now with deliberate and stately step made closer approach to the speaker. So this figure started to walk closer and closer to the prince. Everybody else, when he said, go get him, they kind of... Not good. They didn't go after him completely. They were too scared. What if this thing has red death? I don't want to get it. That could have been their logic. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him. So that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person. And while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the wall. So as he walked, and he got within a yard, so he kind of circled around the prince, everybody just kind of got out of the way. Became spectators. Just like the sea has parted for Moses. They just went to the side. And he was able to get really close. Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through 6 chambers while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted. So, if you remember what happened, we had the mummer, the mass death, walking the length of the rooms, or around the corners, until he got to where the prince was, circled the prince, and then walked back. So everybody has seen him. And the prince is so embarrassed, ashamed, he wants to have good standing with everybody. So the mummer has headed back to his black room, and the prince starts chasing him. And he has a dagger. He's going to do some damage. And so he gets right up behind him, and the mummer turns around. And it's important you understand, what room is this happening in? Black room. With the black clock, the ebony clock. And so he turns around and spins. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which, instantly afterward, fell prostrate in death Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock. So he's right next to that clock. They gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like masks, which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. So it's almost like it was ghost. There was no human being behind. They thought, this person just killed our prince. They still think that it was somebody in a costume. And once they grab it, they realize, oh no. And they saw the prince dead. And that's where in this last paragraph, everybody realized with horror that the Red Death has arrived. And you cannot, in the moral, remember, the allegory, You cannot escape death. You might be able to postpone it, but death will ultimately get you. You can postpone it with exercise nowadays and medicine and vitamins, but you will die at some point. And we see that play out. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the light of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. So in essence, this party that they had, once they sealed themselves in, it was kind of like they were living within their tomb or within their grave. It's like they buried themselves. Because once we have the last person dead, the clock stops. Here's where we can start trying to guess what that clock symbolizes. We always think clocks, okay, we have, it's telling us the time. It's telling us, it's 9:30 now. When it's 10:30, okay, it's 10:30. We're moving forward. We're counting up. But clocks have also been known to count down. So if we look at it, each hour that thing went off, and it freaked everybody out, it was one less hour that they had to live. And once people were ultimately dead, the clock ceased to work. The lights ceased to burn. And so darkness and everything shut down. There was no click, click. There was no ding dong every hour of the clock. And so we have this dark, gruesome plague, everybody dead, and however they fell on the ground, that's the pose that they would forever be. Can you imagine somebody down the road stumbling upon this place, breaking in, and what will they find? They'll find 1,000 people dressed up in costumes, just dead. Well, skeletons, I guess, dressed in costumes, dead. Can you imagine the sight of that? The gruesome horror of what these people, instantly they thought, we've escaped death all this time, but they still lived in horror every time they heard that clock for 5 or 6 months. So it's inevitable. So all of a sudden, this bad thing happened that, oh my gosh, death is actually here. It's too late. It's like when you see a movie and somebody is in one of those suits that protects them from radiation or whatever, then all of a sudden they get a slit in the suit. I gotta go, put your hand over it, but you know that wasn't quick enough and they're contaminated. No, it's okay, I'll wash it out, And you go through the chemical shop, but you know that they're contaminated, and you know there's nothing you can do. If anybody's watching Walking Dead, the zombie show, if anybody gets scratched, no matter how small of a scratch or a huge bite out of you, you're eventually going to turn into that zombie. It might be a little bit or it might be a long time, but it's inevitable. And so they realized at that moment that it was inevitable, they were all going to die. And that's the plague and the allegory of the death and what the clocks, with the symbolism of time and what's left of your life. So it's pretty scary stuff. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you were able to, with all of our background information leading up to this on Poe, maybe you enjoyed it a little bit more, understanding his pain concerning his the women in his life, from his mom to Virginia to the other women that he lost, whether through relationship problems or death. You can see the struggle of that author represented in the futility of these people trying to hold on to their life, trying to hold on to maybe their loves. And ultimately you can't. It's pulled away from you. And just when you think you've beat it, it shows up again. Nowadays, just when you think you beat cancer once and you're in remission, and it shows up again. It's another punch to the gut. And that's what's playing out here. And I think that knowing a little bit about the Poe's life, that should have given you another level of understanding to this particular piece. Okay?